Queensland Fire Department, heaven help us, that there was defined roles for the urban firefighters in terms of asset protection and the Rural Fire Service to deal with the bush and grass and that generally works fairly well. Although it'd be fair to say that the urban and rural firefighters didn't always get on, but that's greatly improved to what it used to be. And QFIS has certainly done a lot over a period of time to be better able to deal with fires. Now, a lot of the rural firefighters would say to me, we need to be more proactive. I agree. But if we don't respond, we're slaughtered. Trust me. So that's the balance we've still got to work on. We need to do more proactive work, absolutely, without question. And I think the Rural Fire Service at the moment's got some good programs they're developing. But I'll make a point in a slide further on about everybody's interests are different in relation to fire. And obviously having an aware community, because a lot of what hazard management, if you like, talks about is shared responsibility in a community. People have to be aware how to look after themselves and help themselves, whether it's floods, cyclones, storms or fire. And in our case today, it's fire. Here's a bit of the policy bit. A series of documents that have been published over the years. And this is the state planning policy, natural hazards, risk and resilience, bushfire, read floods, cyclones, storm. There's different ones. And in this case, I'll just talk about the policies. You can read the state interest statement there. The main policies that it works around are state and local refined mapping, and it's important. Local is very important because local government plays a key role in this whole document. Doing a risk assessment, bushfire hazard assessments, and land use approach that addresses bushfire risk assessment and integrates with broader risk management objectives. Love all those words. Good. But that's a document you can find online. It's quite detailed. And it covers particularly new developments, building houses and property in bushfire-prone areas, designated bushfire-prone areas. And we'll talk about that now. This document is put out by QFIS at the time, but it's a guide, a technical reference guide, as it says, to support that previous document. So if anybody looking for some reading in support, this document supports the previous one in a more specialist technical knowledge, how to implement it really. And of course, the state planning policy has also started a new industry for people, professional people, to do bushfire hazard assessments, working out the BAL level for home construction, the bushfire attack level, which determines construction type. The standard, Australian standard for building in bushfire-prone areas has been adopted for quite a while now. Local governments determine the bushfire-prone area, and that's why that state mapping policy about being able to identify bushfire-prone areas and name them. If you want to build inside a bushfire-prone area, you have to have hazard assessments done and understand what the bushfire attack level is. And the bushfire attack level goes up to a score of 40 kilowatts per square metre, which is basically called flame zone. So you'd be building right in a flame zone and down to about 12.5 kilowatts, I think, per square metre. So that's per square metre impacting. Whereas fire line is kilowatts per metre of heat energy that's generated. So where are we? And Bushfire Resilient Communities document, which I just showed you, supports that and talks about all these things. The next document is the Bushfire Plan, and this talks about those objectives, or sets out to outline those objectives. I won't talk through them, but it also talks about things like the state interdepartmental bushfire committee that Greg said he was on, right through to district, to area fire management groups, and to locality-specific fire management groups. And they are meant to do their work to do protection of townships, villages, whatever, very much associated working with local government. So I'll leave those there. They're all available online if people, what I should have done is put the link in, but I probably didn't know how to do that. So here's my main points, if you like. In terms of fire, the greatest thing that went wrong over 200 years ago is fence lines and property lines, because fire is tenure blind. And it's really this fundamental problem that, we've got to deal with it because it's the reality. There's government land agencies that own land, lots of it, private landholders, the whole lot. If you want to get mitigation or hazard reduction on a landscape scale, you've really got to get a lot of people working together, very, very tightly together, to defeat the red tape, to defeat all the different rules and regulations. So I'm very much pleased to hear about, again, Alistair, the work you're doing with Indigenous people. And I think we should incorporate it more, particularly into government agencies that own large, not just parks, but I think it's called Department of Resources now, was NRM, something like that. They own a huge amount of land. And of course, when government buys old cattle stations and locks them up, parkies have got enough people to look after it. Who looks after it? Just goes to rack and ruin. And that's a recipe for a disaster that we all are aware of. So my idea would be obviously to somehow government, I think they're doing it slowly though, but ever so slowly, promote greater use of Indigenous bodies, private bodies like Alistair's Bush Heritage, and I'm sure there are others out there, to get on government land particularly, and just focus on government land for a moment, and start introducing their practices to look after it. Because Parks and Wildlife Service can't do it. They can't manage the estate that they've got to look after, because the estate keeps growing and their budget doesn't, and their staffing doesn't. Now, you'll love this next, biodiversity science as opposed to Indigenous science, 60 to 70 years old. And we haven't talked a lot about burning for biodiversity in the talk so far today. But the fundamental rule in Queensland, and probably everywhere else, who owns the land? The person that owns the land owns the fire problem. That's always been the premise of fire management. I'm absolutely in favour of putting the right fire in the bush. We should never exclude fire from the Australian landscape, never in a million years. How we do it effectively, they are difficult problems to solve. The biodiversity issue, the Queensland Fire and Biodiversity Consortium, doing a lot of work with a lot of people, helping them work out the rhythm of your burning, depending on your vegetation types, your fauna, and that's very important as well. So I don't know that that work's finished, and I don't know whether we fully understand the frequency or not required, how to apply it. But I'm certainly not a scientist. But in my view, when you sit back and look at it, the way we've managed fire in the last, say, 100 years, or probably even less, really a lot of the thinking is not that old, and we don't have the same understanding. But also to imagine that we're going to return to the days of the way Indigenous people looked after land is not viable either. It's not going to happen. Certainly not on the scale that we probably need, but it all can assist. And if we continue the work of integrating Indigenous knowledge with our own knowledge, and work collaboratively, well, I think we'll have a lot more success. And I'm pretty confident that there are good signs that people are improving at that game. I mentioned it last time. I think Parks introduced the good neighbour policy a couple of years ago, because there is always the tension between landholders and parks at different times, and sometimes that communication would break down and things not work out the way they could or should. Communication. Time? Very close. Okay. Very quickly, Indigenous burning is done for different things. The fire service, including rural fire service, don't own any land. They have a different set of objectives when they go about their business. Land managers doing it for different things. Could be plantations, asset protection, private people. You want to maintain primary production. So you've all got different needs, and how do we collectively get that to work together and try and get more burning done? Certainly I support the colleagues in the government agencies. They do need more resources. I've seen it over the years where basically their ability to do what's expected of them has been just hampered. It's just taken away. Rural fire service people very keen to work with landholders, no problem at all, and do a lot of good work. So the outlook, spring outlook, introduced at the AFAC conference the other day, basically saying for Queensland, the areas in red mean above normal fire activity. The rest of it doesn't mean that there won't be any fire. That's probably normal, but they're expecting possibility that we're going to get above normal. And if you look in these areas here, particularly, the amount of frost that we've had this year has killed an awful lot of grass off that I've seen. Not that I've seen too much, but I've seen some. So, and remember, fire season, late winter, spring, moving down through Australia to summer. So this is our time now. Climate outlook. Now, there is rainfall in the forecast, so we might all be saved with what's coming. But certainly some warmer days, and again, that's just the outlook. By the way, I watch a Kiwi weather guy on YouTube, because I watch too much YouTube in retirement, sorry. He does a weekly, twice weekly overview of Australia, and his view is simple, very plainly explained, and very good. Forget his name for the moment. I'll think of it later if anybody wants to know. Phil, his name is, but it's Weather Watch. He's a Kiwi guy. Does a very good job. Little thought I've been having lately. Our atmosphere nourishes us, but it also can destroy us. And I almost put in can/will. And that's what we're up against. I don't know what your thoughts are about that, but climate pollution, air, land, water. We stuff all that up. There's no food being grown. There's no air to breathe. So anyway, let's end on a happier note. Just a fire of the shot of the fires at Tara.
Well, you guys, thank you very much. You all know, I think, a lot more than we did when you came here. We also know we've got a lot of thinking to do, a lot of people to impress, a lot of government agencies to get more money, a lot of researchers to get more money, and a lot of people to understand it. So thank you ever so much for pushing us along the line there, get some of these things done. Impress people. You've been promised a prize. So you've got a modest prize. We're under-resourced too.
So look, what we'll do is ask the two remaining speakers and Nelson to come forward. Sorry, no, Charles was doing this one. Yeah, Charles. Sorry, and first of all, we will have questions for Lee because we didn't have time to do that immediately after his presentation. So, folks, if you would like to take a seat there with Charles. But first up, we'll have any questions for Lee's presentation. Yeah, over here.
I've actually got two questions. The blocking, you probably call them blockies. They generally take without much money. You build substandard, certainly on forests and houses, potentially very far-prone environments from the Brisbane Valley, West Coram, Mulmerran. There's a lot of it out there. What do we do about? And we'll blame it on climate change. $1 million worth of lives lost because of climate change. You know, it's building in the wrong place and not having the resources to look after themselves. So, what do we do about that situation?
That's a very big question. But I think
Just seems like words.
yeah, what we've been battling with for a very, very long time is, and I gave a talk about this 2013 at the AFAC conference, is on a bad fire day and we lose all these properties because of urban planning failures, allowing people to build in not only just fire, but floodplains, allowing people to build in landslip areas. So on a bad day, particularly in southeast Australia, more so, you can lose 30, 40 homes in an urban environment and the fire did this wrong or didn't do that. And they got no hope in hell of saving those properties because what's been allowed to happen. So I guess that natural resilience state planning policy is an attempt in a future time. I think we first started working on it in 2014 before I left, was to prevent urban development, urbanisation in inappropriate natural hazard areas without some mitigation. So that Western Downs area is just a nightmare for more than one reason. And I don't know how, we generally can't fix the problems of the past, but there is an attempt to try and stop it happening in the future. But there's failures in building codes in all types of situations. That's another story, but yeah, look, I agree with you. A lot of times the emergency services are blamed for, like Lismore floods, for example. Where's the SES? Where's all the flood boats? Well, how many SES people do you think are in Lismore? How many boats do you think they have? Hang on a minute. These people live in community. And people complained there weren't flood boats to rescue us. The other side of the coin there is civilians who went to assist, then all the emergency service people get all thing about workplace health and safety, insurance, liability, all that. But you know what I mean? Australia relies on volunteers in more ways than one, and none more so than in emergency service. So yeah, what was your second question?
Job.
I think there's a
Marvelous job.
Yeah.
yes. A question on chat, did you say? John?
Indeed, there is. We have a question from Ken. Saying, I'm going to get in trouble. Is the big FDDI uptick due to temperature, humidity, or wind? And on the 5 days where the actual temperature extremes reach record numbers, what about the incredible major fires since European settlement and paleo fires of the last 1,000 years? Is it really FDDI or fuel load out of control and more infrastructure in harm's way? Not a climate change denier, but an extreme event skeptic.
Yeah, well, FDI is made up of all of those factors: the fuel load, temperature, relative humidity, soil moisture, wind. And my saying, particularly at this time of year, in August, the moment we get wind, we get trouble from the west, obviously, or northwest. Anything northwest, westerly vector, this time of year, we get trouble. So the question sort of went around the place, but basically FDI is a factor of those things that measured, and we didn't measure that in paleo times. But it's wind, all those.
Question? Another question?
Another one on wind. It's an exponential. Temperature's only linear. It's exponential with wind speed. We've got really crap measurements of wind speed across Australia, and anemometers only came in the late 70s.
Yeah.
I'm very scared about people doing baselines. You remember the late 1930s, 1940s, huge dust storms and high wind speeds coming out of the northwest. And we say it's worst on record. Because we really haven't looked back very far, I'm skeptical about some of those statements for how much worse it is than history. Just because our history is pretty ordinary.
Yeah, well, climate on the graph, it talks about records 80, 50, but the wind, yeah, well, whether it's temperature, wind, dryness, whatever, you've got to contend with that. But what we've seen in the long-term history, there have been definite periods, obviously hotter, colder, drier, less. I didn't know about more oxygen that Paul told us about, but yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
No question.
Just to give some clarification, now you mentioned that it's local governments responsible for declaring bushfire hazard areas, and there's some national mapping of sort of bushfire. I mean, do they have discretion over that? Because I can see that obviously they want to encourage people to go and live in the Western Downs to increase their rate base, so they've kind of got a conflict of interest if they do have that much discretion.
Local governments, as far as I'm aware, they designate it, and whether they do or don't, maybe some, but there is the broader mapping, and there's mapping behind you too that has been kindly brought along. So it's like most recently declaration of flood area that you saw in the media, where everybody said, look, I live on a hill, but I'm now paying this insurance policy. So it's a very tenuous area, because once you affect urban development, and a lot of regional towns particularly want to encourage more development, more population growth, and you do get issues of inappropriate development. And that's what this policy is meant to try and alleviate. So you can build in a bushfire prone area, provided you build a property to the standard.
But first of all, you have to have an area declared a bushfire.
Yeah, well, all the mapping.
If you don't even declare it, you kind of,
Yeah.
you're not going to win.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
All people though, without much money.
Exactly.
Cities are too expensive.
No, that's correct, and I'm not sure whether that Western Downs area has declared any areas. You'll find it on their local government maps, but it's all, you know what local governments and planning approvals are like. There's the whole politics of that involved. So questions right. It's it's very difficult. But they have the information through the state government mapping systems to declare or not.
And the state has some responsibility before they acknowledge approve a planning scheme. So
Yes,
check
they've
that
got
it's
ultimate
their
control.
documentation. So maybe that's where it comes into effect.
Could I just note also your question about local government responsibility? Under the Act, local government is the first base for hazard management. So local governments are responsible. If they cannot handle an incident, then it goes to the district level. If district cannot handle it, it goes to state. And for the really big thing, it can involve the federal government. So under legislation, local government is first responsibility. There was a question here first, sorry, Paul.
Yeah, sorry, just a couple of questions if I could, to Lee and then to Alpha. Firstly with Lee, yeah, I guess, what I was alluding to earlier was a fantastic from your leadership to where we are now. The uplift in the rural, QFES going to the rural fire services has been well supported by agriculture industry and really seeing some positive moves there. I guess, question though, I was called to Parliament last week, or a couple of politicians would put some question time about members in their electorates who had fire permits for fuel reduction burning that tried to conduct fuel reduction burning with it being notified and appliances came out and put those fires out. So this is the peri-urban reality in centre that you're alluding to, where there's neighbours in the area who don't want the fire. The rural landowners know they have to fuel reduction burn, and there's this tension that's existing, and our members are being calling up. So we want some response here. I was wondering if you had a position on that or some thoughts on that as to how we leave out what we do.
Well, I think what you're saying is that somebody's tried to do their hazard reduction and neighbours dialed 000 probably and called out. Now, the officer who came out, if probably an auxiliary brigade from a desert or somewhere, they should know that if there's an active permit and all the conditions are met, was it a hazard? Is it dangerous? They shouldn't necessarily extinguish it, but I mean individual circumstances.
Lee, because before we turn to a more general panel, both of our speakers, and we finalise questions for Lee specifically. Is your question for Lee? No. Anyone got another question for Lee?
Oh, I have a problem. On the back of Greg's one, Lee, in Queensland we have the benefit of just having a permit for light system. In New South Wales, you have to go through much more regulatory hoops to put fire in country. Linking into Alistair's point about reducing red tape to actually put more fire on the ground, from your experience, what is, if you had the magic wand to wave over the policy banner, what would you implement to put more fire in country? What would you do from a quick QFD perspective that would help meet some of the concerns that Greg just outlined in that very real scenario that happened?
Yeah, thanks for that point. The permit to light fire system was introduced in Queensland a very, very long time ago with the Rural Fires Act and subsequently in the Fire and Rescue Service Act, because it was about primary production, enabling landholders, graziers, farmers to use fire for primary production. That's what its original purpose was, and it still is. So it is a very effective system as opposed to many other states about all the environmental issues that you've got to go through. So I'm not aware of, I think I've got friends around the Menango area where sometimes the local government environmental health officer actually intervenes and tries to limit, inhibit, stop from a biodiversity point of view. So the local brigade, for example, might be prepared to work with a landholder or even the council itself to burn some council estate. And the environmental health or somebody else will come along and say, well, you can't do this and you can't do that. And it's the same as the issue we had with main roads over the years about roadside burning. I think that's improved. I think biodiversity did some good work in that area a few years back. So the fact is we don't have the restrictions that other states have, and it is relatively easy if everybody knows their place in the system. The fire warden, although I have a mate who took on the role of local fire warden in a district, and many people don't actually fill out, don't advise their neighbours, don't comply with the few basic steps that are there, which then leads to the major budget. And I think that also happened in interactions between parks people that had private land or leased land up against park rangers. So there's a lot, but we should take away the positive, and that is our system is probably better than most. And I'm not sure off the top of my head what else to do, but I think it's always linked to who's trying to stop this and for what reason. And generally, it's people that think there shouldn't be fire in the landscape. Well, as you've heard my position on that, I'm 100% in support of that. But again, you have to abide by some rules and regulations.
So if it's everyone's okay, our plan was, okay, just a moment, to move to a panel discussion in the last hour, and it's now 4:10. So is your question directly to Lee? Because he certainly can be.
Somewhat, but I just want to say that
Yeah.
in several previous years, I was involved in writing submissions for various things. And there is quite a range of grants and things available, both in the state and the Commonwealth. And they are things that you can access. And if you want to engage with local government, which I think is probably the right agencies to get active, it's usually best to talk to somebody, an officer within a council who is attached to a committee. Usually these subcommittees have a chairman, they have 4 or 5 subcommittees, all of them. And one should also try to invite them there. And I found that you have very good engagement with those subcommittees, because they're the ones who really put forward decisions and plans, whatever. Yes, it can be important to get their on side, but if you get grant funding for a year or two, quite often local governments will agree to continue to fund that. You know, somebody like Alistair engaging in a local government area, and they'll take it on in perpetuity. And I would think that fire in the landscape is a very big problem for lots of smaller local authorities. If you start small, you can get success.
Just quickly, one problem that happened over a number of years, say from 2006 when Tropical Cyclone Larry hit Innisfail right through to when I left, there were major disasters every year in Queensland, if not multiple. And one of the things we found is many regional local governments over time shed their workforce, shed their machinery, and they no longer have machinery that was once relied upon. It's all contracted because they've got very small workforces. So it's not quite what you're talking about, but those issues are real.
Maybe are you referring to, because each local government is required to have a disaster management committee?
Well, I've been on a few
Yeah.
local government disaster, but
Mm.
no, it's more that councils do have resources, and they have political clout in the sense that if you want to like sort of inject Alistair in this sort of field into a local community, the political figures, if you tell them the right story, they'll sign up to it. And if you can secure money not from the local authority, but from the Commonwealth or somebody, it could be some sort of resilience program. Resilience, everyone
Don't forget that slide I had of the Queensland Bushfire Plan. There's a whole hierarchy that I mentioned: area fire management groups, particularly local government representatives, fire service, other members. That they're starting to become more prominent. I think certainly Rockhampton City Council's got a very good plan now, and many others would have. So, and there could be a particular high risk locality that they can have specific plans for. So, how to defend, because a lot of it still comes from the asset protection mindset, not necessarily the landscape or biodiversity, but there's that structure where local government offices.
Sort of different parts of local government, the bigger ones anyway, are not really on the same wavelength, or they're not talking to each other, because you might have that group that's all into it.
Forget about
environmental health.
the whole structure of local authority. You've got to find the local authority that has people recently had a disaster or whatever. So they're partly sold, and you seek out councils. Some people in local authority are real doers, and if you talk to them, they'll set up a meeting, hold a public forum, all sorts of things. And it's about engaging the local people, because they're the ones who, particularly in rural areas where they actually control land, it's not like in blocks.
Yeah.
Even convincing them about this early burning, patchwork burning, stuff about the water content of the soil. These are ideas that they can be taken up pretty quickly. And it's being done by the landowner, don't expect government. But it can be funded by various state or national projects. Commonwealth 20 years ago had something like funding for local projects. Just put that in Google. It came up with about there might have been 50 different programs. Obviously, that's across a whole range of things, but you find 3 or 4 that you could turn resilience to.
There's probably people in Alistair's organisation whose job is to do that.
We'll see. In Bush Heritage, we have a team, exactly as they said, that's their job. We actually got 2 teams. We've got a grants and writing team, and it's their job to go and find the grants and get them, and not just from government sources, from all over the world. And then we have a media and comms team as well, and their role is not only to engage with the volunteers and have meetings with the volunteers where they'll go, Al, you've got to stop burning for a week and spend some time in the city and meet with these people and share the knowledge and share experiences. So there's a lot of that as well, but there's also educational opportunities that they seek out. So here's an opportunity. Let's go. So yeah.
I think it's a very good point, though, you raised that, ordinary people, whatever, wherever they are, on the land or elsewhere, to make a contribution in the way that you suggest, seeking out some more opportunities. But look, I think we're in a panel now, so
I'll just add one more thing to that too. One of the things that we do quite a bit is we talk to our neighbours quite a bit, all our neighbours. And we share that kind of knowledge with them. and quite often some of our neighbours are national parks, some of them are big cattle enterprises like ACC and then, as I said in my talk, we also have the team that works in the ag sector and goes and works on properties. So some of the companies that they work with are like Human Cattle Company, AACO, NAPCO. We share all of that knowledge with us as well. So we're out there trying to share that knowledge and get that.
But thank you for that question. So what I'd like to do now is hand over to Charles. He was chairing the panel that we're going to move to. Okay, our question here, the forum theme was fire in the landscape perspectives. And I think this afternoon we have heard 3 very different perspectives on that. But probably Charles will ask each of our 2 speakers here, some of their final thoughts if they haven't had a chance to say something else then. Now, Christopher back here has had his hand up for a question, so he may be your first question. And there's a gentleman over there as well. But I'll hand over to Charles now to chair the final half-hour panel.
Okay, I'm just going to interrupt for a minute. I think there's one person here would like to speak. There's an inference made we don't have much about biomass. Grant Stone, would you like to give a quick rundown on what you can solve that problem for us? And I think there's a bit of literature out the back there.
Charles, I thought I was going to go at the end.
You're on the panel
now. Thanks very much. John Carter and I have been to previous society meets, and we've found that some of our products have been very useful for the attendees, so we just brought them again. So the long paddock has our world famous rainfall and pasture growth posters there in percentiles. It's been said a number of times, how do you judge the rainfall, the pasture growth, a number of indices relative to history? We use percentiles, and if you don't know how they're made up, we have some animations there for you as well. There's a number of products out the back there that from our forage side that relate crop-based assessments, and also some of the parks and wildlife by region bio guidelines. On Aussie grass itself, you have soil moisture maps and fire curing anomalies and the grass fire risk. We say this because we're not on commission at all. We just like to help, and all those products there. Please take posters as you leave, because we don't want to take anything home. They live for another 6 years on your wall there because you can get updates. And we do produce model pasture biomass. It's governed by modelling and satellite and green cover. And we do all the other ground cover and other indices that are good for grazing land management. So we'll be around to the end. Any questions if you want to do so. Thanks very much.
Grant, for further information, I think Zevo Labs also run in conjunction with you. Do they know, or is that a separate program?
A number of the people within that organisation, they're a third-party external organisation, were working with us and are on the external side of things now. They learnt their trade basically out of Queensland government, and we are using techniques the same as they do that are freely available, and we will have products that are not the same but using the same technology in the future, which will be biomass and forage tools that use artificial intelligence to run a certain number of animals on a block, leaving a certain amount of biomass, a certain amount of cover. And a lot of our products here are simpler. Just put a lot on plan, put your properties in, you get sent PDF emails. You have the chance to use imagery with those those products, they get included files that you can use on GIS platforms now. So much easier. You are not forced to pay for this in any way, shape, or form. When you have subscriptions, you can ask us any questions at all, and leave it there. That there's competition in a number of phases of every type of widget or product, and we all exist in the same world. If you only had one person putting stuff out, that'd be a monopoly, and we don't like that.
Grant, what are some long-term trends you've observed?
Well, you've got from 1890 in rainfall and pasture growth, our wet and dry periods, and just on your property rainfall and pasture growth, we'll put the stats there for your median. Not everybody goes on averages. You should go on your median, and we'll go. All right. What's your bottom 10% of years? What's your top 10% of years? And of course, we have our drought page as well, which has got the drought status. And if it goes through, soon you'll have a seasonal condition indicator that will be a rolling 12 months of pasture growth and relate whether you're going into drought or out of drought. Apart from that, John?
We do produce daily fuel loads across Australia, a 5-kilometre grid. Green grass, dry grass, grass without tree litter. It's not the whole tree load because you're missing the bark and some storage fuels, but that's pretty hard to model. And we've been doing that for 15, 20 years.
We could keep on talking all day. If you want to know what your trend is on a paddock, you can use a mapping product there, and it will use on your lot on plan or your paddock, and it'll give you the monthly ground cover. It'll show you with the rainfall how it waxes and wanes, and we'll drive a line through that, and it'll tell you what your trend is and whether you're going up or down, or just use percentiles, and every place is different.
Great, thank you for that. Before I take question on the floor, being in this chair, I can ask the first question to the panel. My observations driving around, and Stockbridge is a good example, is some of our country beyond fire, and therefore could we use should mechanical and chemical means be a legitimate way of sort of bringing it back, or should we say resetting the clock?
Thanks, Lee. It depends. It's going to be the short answer. I think in a lot of places you can, if you introduce fire, it's going to be on the long run, long term. And there's a project I'm working on with a partnership down in New South Wales that it's historically been heavily overgrazed and hasn't had fire on it for 170 years, I think it is, 160 years. And we've, the last 2 years, we've slowly been introducing fire onto it. And what we're noticing is that we're now actually getting an increase in the perennials and the annuals, particularly after the last 2 years of good rain through there. And I was actually supposed to go there next week, but I had too much rain, can't get there. I don't feel like getting the vehicle bogged again. So yeah, I think if you've got the time and the money, the resources, you can introduce fire without mechanical means. I do think mechanical on those stock grazing routes where haven't been managed as well, combination of both helps get it there a little bit quicker.
Thank you. Lee, would you like to go?
No.
Okay, right. The first question was.
Oh.
Thank you.
Yeah, Christopher said, look, fire is the most dramatic symptom of climate change. We've heard a lot about mitigation, but I'd just be interested to hear from the three of you, including Charles, who represents a learned society of scientists, what is your degree of optimism? Are we going to be seeing a lot more out of control fire in the Queensland landscape and beyond in ways that politicians don't dare talk about?
I share those directed at me rather than the panel.
All three.
Okay, I'd answer, I'd say this, hopefully this forum today is probably a start of bringing a wider group of people together to discuss that. And I think I'd put it under what I would call a wicked problem. And wicked problems are one, whichever answer you come to, someone's going to be offended by it. So it's make sure all the stakeholders are involved, everyone gets a say in it. And when I say all the stakeholders, that's all the stakeholders. And I think that there are sometimes legislation gets brought in where some of the major stakeholders are sort of left out of it. But I'll pass it on to those who probably know more.
Yeah, I think the politicians don't understand what the future could be. I think like Charles, we all need to work together. As he said in his talk, fire is tenure line. It doesn't care about boundary fences, roads, houses, or anything like that. If it wants to go through that fence, it'll go through that fence. At the end of the day, we all got to work together. We've got to be talking and be on the same page. And I think that's probably the style of it, and I think it's going to have to come from the ground up. I don't think politicians fully understand what's happening out there or what the potential is that could happen out there.
Yeah, thanks, Christopher. Unfortunately, yes, I think we'll see more large-scale destructive fires. Because I don't think the cohesion and the collaboration is there yet. There's some good work happening, but I think the climate responds quicker than we are, and is changing more quickly than people want to believe or realise. Me personally, I wasn't expecting that AFAC outlook that I put up be so prominent this year for Queensland. I thought we might have got another year, but we've had very good growth. So part of that problem, most of that above average fire risk area is in regional Queensland. It's not on the eastern seaboard around major cities, but always, to answer your question, unfortunately, yes.
Actually, something just occurred to me. One comment I would make is that no one seems to mention the effect, as well as climate change and what have you. We've also had introduced grasses like gamba grass in the north, buffalo grass in middle Australia. That to the fuel load. I put it's a bit like pouring petrol on a fire. It tends to go really bad. Northern Territory, Southern Australia are about to ban or have banned about to ban buffalo grass. I think it's shutting the door up. The horse is bolted.
There's a question at the back.
Charles, I'd like to actually ask you a question. As a grazier, I'd like to get your views on how you see fire being used within the grazing area.
I think the answer is traditionally, I think we've had fire suppression, and that's probably not quite the full story. Graziers have used fire a lot, but we've used it as a development tool rather than a management tool. And I think Gil Campbell might like to make a comment on that also. But traditionally, I think we're only just now realising it's now a very useful management tool. But in the past, when you look at the development of relow areas and what have you, it's been a development tool, and it's been broad scale. Effect on biodiversity, where it was replaced with a monoculture of buffalo grass. I think it's coming back to haunt us maybe. But Gil, would you like to make a comment? Because I'd call you a traditional old grazier, and I think you've worked much more with nature than against it.
As we've been hearing today, for around about 40,000 years, we've had previous managers that used fire extremely scientifically. Anyone who says they didn't has their head so far up their backside. It's totally proven. The evidence is out there everywhere. So we have taken the fire out of the environment. Not totally, no, but the right sort of fire at least has been taken out of the environment for 200 years. Thank God, thank goodness, we are now in the process, it's going to be a slow one, I believe, but in the process of putting it back in again. But meanwhile, we have to learn how to use it. Not an easy one, because fire, along with Mother Nature, along with the weather patterns, is a very long learning process. Extremely long, actually, for a human, for a single human. Fire, in most environments, is necessary, but somehow we have to learn how and when to use it, and the appropriate conditions. So I've been using it a little bit. I would love to use it more, but I'm not game yet. Still learning how to use it. The results are very, very good. Way more beneficial than without it. For regrowth retardation, for pasture regeneration. And you just grow fatter cows afterwards. I do know. But also, if you do use fire, do not put stock onto it until it is ready, which is it's gone to seed, usually. Please do not put stock onto it until the new pasture is ready to accept being eaten off. But if you eat it off too soon, you will actually kill it. There we go.
Good.
Yeah.
Wayne, there's probably a few things in the background. If you remember, some of us can remember stories of the prickly pear. It all died after Cactobacter seed in the early 30s. My understanding was that there's a huge pile of dry matter sitting there, and I think most people dropped the match in it. Now, what the long-term effects of that are, I'm not too sure, but I think that influenced what biodiversity we ended up with, what people we ended up with. The other thing is the 50s are very wet years. Fire was used quite a lot by some of my ancestors. Since then, it's been a dry climate, and I think and with overgrazing, we haven't used fire nearly as much, if at all. I think we need to understand the history sometime, why we did it, what happened.
Thanks, Charles. This question is to all three of you. So at the back of this too. The 23-24 fire season across Queensland was quite significant. And we, as Ag Force, as a members of organisation, I've got lots of calls from members saying, can you come out and want to talk about fire in its respective areas? So I went to 9 different centres across Queensland and fed some of this information back to the State Bushfire Committee. And we had lots of meetings, the last one being in Roma in February this year, where lots of rural fire service people came out to that one as well. And the members congealed around a point of saying, we need, so in response to your points, Lee, so there's multiple interests involved in fire in the landscape, multiple perspectives. And so the proposition from Ag Force members was, let's look at the Carnarvons. It's a big area that seems to get it wrong consistently. Let's look at the Carnarvons. Let's work with a coordinated fire management planning process on the Carnarvons. This is Ag Industry asking the question. The State Bushfire Committee said, yeah, that's good. The National Park said that that's good. So we've started the process. The process has started. They not know how to do it. So I'm asking you three collectively how to do it. But before I do, I just say that what has started now is there's a group that started up in the northern Carnarvons. Said, okay, let's go. Great idea. The southern guys don't know what to do. Western guys don't know what to do. So it started there with a group of people who are interested in doing something near experiential. So based on your knowledge, your long-term leadership, your practical on-farm leadership, what do we do? So it's it. The invitation's been put. The Carnarvon's been selected. It's been thumbs up. Let's go. So what do we do?
Thanks, Greg. I think that there is a framework that exists for that, and the local area rural fire service inspector or those crews should provide leadership in that space. Good, that's good to hear, because that whole structure that I talked about under you in the state area fire management groups down here, that's what it's set up for, is to get people together. And in this case, it could even be that locality specific area plan, because that's a particular problem. And I can remember when I was in Rockhampton in the very early 2000s, so I think it was maybe even late 90s, fires, they sent my old boss, old George Grassi, out from Rocky to help try and manage this massive fire. The old Scotsman, he was a bit lost, but there's been some breakouts out there, but I think there's also some good work, as you showed, those scars. So my response is there is a structure, put pressure on the rural fire service local district or area, forget what they call them now, and there is a framework for that to work that should help those guys come together.
To follow on with that, I actually got asked by Parks to have a meeting with them last Wednesday, about Northern Carnarvons. So again, they said, "Oh, it'll only be an hour." So I ended up making them buy me lunch because we went for 4 hours. I gave them all the knowledge I had and showed them stuff like I had on the slide. The simple answer is the Carnarvons have to be burnt every year. You've got to give it the opportunity to burn. And so I was senior ranger for the Carnarvons from 2015 till end of 20, well, this time 21. And we only had the one really big wildfire, which was in 1819. It was on the first ever catastrophic fire weather days recorded. Deep water went up the day after Carnarvon went up, and that was actually a hazard reduction burn south of the park. So, we won't go there. But so all the skies that or burn areas that we had put in early in that year did pull out that fire. And the fire last year was, the fire weather was nowhere near as bad, and it burned a lot more. So it demonstrates we need fire burn areas in that country. All those neighbours to the north, I know them all, and I've spoken with them. They've texted me and got some messenger things from them. And all those guys in the west as well, like around Salvatore in the western sections of I've spoken with them as well. So yeah, we're being tapped into for that knowledge already, and we'd be happy to be part of those conversations and those committees as well. So it does serve an interest for us as well, because we want to protect Carnarvon Station reserve there. One of the footnotes of all of this is within the Carnarvon Ranges, there's semi-evergreen vine thickets that I found there. So in Queensland, semi-evergreen vine thickets, which is bottle trees, vine scrubs and all that, over 43% of those ecosystem is found in the Carnarvon Ranges. And it's probably even higher now since the 1819 fires, the 2023 fires, and that sort of thing. So there's probably a higher percentage in the Carnarvon. So that makes it even more critical to be protected on our reserve and also the park, and also provide better feed for those neighbours as well, because the country's so rough that you can't put fire breaks in, so everyone has to work through there.
So that's correct. Because Charles, so as an ag force staffer, I get calls from producers around the Carnarvons who are saying, "What the hell going on? It's coming out. It's going in. It's coming out. It's going in." We're tired. So Charles, man, how are producers engaged in that process? So how do we have that collective, like with these multiple perspectives? How do we have a process to really make that work?
Yeah, the one thing I was going to say just before I hand over to Charles is the frustration we experienced as well was that the
communication from certain stakeholders. I'll leave it there.
So it's a problem, fires going both ways, some coming in and others getting out.
I think Lee touched on a while ago, most producers are scared of fire. I'm one of them. It scares crap out of me every time I light up. But with good management, you control the development burns. It's the management burns we never learned. But I think part of the problem of Carnarvon's is my understanding, and Lee might correct me, but go back a number of years, a lot of the old traditional families understood the country, but regularly it worked very, very well. I think a generational change, I think most of them sold out. There was a whole new lot came in and they were dead scared of fire and they stopped burning. So as a result, I think back in the 90s might have been, there were huge fires up there. And I think it's taken a long while to realise that, yeah, fire needs to be in it. How you manage that is quite difficult. I think discussions like this probably should build some, commonly agreeing ways of managing it. And I think we've all agreed here today, fire needs to be in there. I think when it comes into peri-urban landscapes where it's close to urban structures and not my backyard, that's when the problems arise. But I think we had one, I can remember years ago, we had one neighbour who'd come from the north. It lit a fire, went away for a weekend because in those days up in the north, you just light a fire and let it go. You don't worry about it, it goes a few miles. Who cares? Unfortunately, the closer resident doesn't work too well. So my neighbour's the other neighbour of mine sitting down having lunch and suddenly gets called out to fight this fire. There was no one there on the property to look after it. So, there's different experiences and what works in different areas, the culture behind it. But I think the old timers, and especially the 50s, I think they used fire a lot because they had enough fuel to burn. Since then, we've had dry periods or very big range of things, and we've lost that knowledge. And if you don't use it, you forget.
Can I make another comment, please, on the Mount Moffat, part of the Carnarvons? I was there about 8 years ago for 4 days doing a cook's offside for a TV production crew. From 4 to 40 people in bed. Okay. So I was the food conveyor as well as the cook's offsider for 4 days. I went all over the Mount Moffat, pretty much all over Mount Moffat Park, on all their roads anyway. In all that time, I saw 3 very small family groups of roos, about 4 wallabies. I saw about 3 dingo tracks in the last rain, whatever the hell that was. There were a few crows, the willy wagtails and some peewees around the house area at Mount Moffat. That is all I saw in 4 days. I probably travelled 100 kilometres at least in that time. Big lots of grass, and we hadn't been a fire for a long time, but I think later on there was big fires. But that same area was probably one of the second or third concentrations of Aboriginals in the whole of Australia, damn near. Yet this, when I was there, it wouldn't affect 10 Aboriginals, wouldn't affect them. So something, there's no cattle that eat the grass, there's only kangaroos, and they weren't there either. So something else has to happen. It just stood out so far.
My memory also, correct me, my vague understanding of history was some of the first areas in Queensland after the Darling Downs settled with the Carnarvon Ranges. And my assumption for that is 1, it had reliable water, and 2, in those days, it was very open country. And that's going back to the 1860s. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. If you go up into Delubra, which is what's that, northwest of Mount Moffat.
If you think Mount Moffat's the back of beyond Delubra is.
There are old fencings there, still there, old sheep fences. So they took fences there in about mid-1800s, I think they, from Surat to Charleville to Dolby, whatever, they were all cleared with somebody. Known with sheep in those times. But yes, yeah.
Could I just make a comment? I'm going to talk out of my lane right now. What you were saying, Gil, really is the lack of biodiversity. The place wasn't alive.
Yes.
So the indigenous culture would have been to keep clean country that encouraged the introduction of all of native grassland species, all the diversity in the world, and that ecosystem working together with the fire regime produces healthy, productive country. And that's true for grazing land as well. That's this whole regenerative agricultural approach that I've been so following. But there's some really good work being done by South East Queensland Landscapes in the far southwest, Charleville and further west, where even on very dead flat country, by slowing the water down, protecting and improving erosion, getting country covered and staying hydrated, protects them. They've got feed longer, they've got drought resistance, their productivity, no chemicals, let nature do the work for you. That's where we missed the boat, I reckon.
But just on that point about this regenerative agricultural movement, isn't that all about letting the grasses grow pretty long, quick rotations and everything, and keeping it hydrated? And I'm just wondering where fire actually fits in with that event.
Yeah, that's a good question. I met a guy at Central Queensland University a few years ago, runs an organic farm outside of Rocky, and he follows these principles. And he hasn't had fire on his property for 18 years. But when you look at the property, he's got water, he's got lagoons, he's got bird life, he's got grass like this, but it's protecting your riparian areas, so keeping cattle off your river and erosion. But it's a question I've got to go back to him why he hasn't used fire, because he probably looks very, very healthy. But it's rotation of the cattle, and what Gil said, don't let the cattle back on that freshly burnt till it's ready for it, because that's what's killed it all, the overgrazing, overstocking. So rotation, keeping the soil hydrated. I mean, I'm no expert on that. It's just I think it's a good concept. But I think I will go back to him and say, when are you going to have a fire? Well, it's a few years since I spoke to him now. Did he get burnt out in the 2018-19 seasons? I don't know that for sure yet, but he told me he hadn't used fire for a long time. He just lets the cattle do the work.
Not really. I don't know much about this regenerative farming. I haven't come across much. I would think that it would depend on the season. If there is an opportunity, it wouldn't be a bad idea to put a fire in there. But it would depend on how he's running his stock, he's running and his plans for rotation through the drier times. You wouldn't want to burn out feed through the dry times. But if there's an opportunity in the wet season, yeah, it might be a good one of those paddocks that he's not going to be using over the next few months. And the soil's warm, so the grass is going to be growing quicker. Might be an opportunity to drop some fire into it. Yeah.
And what would be the benefit of doing so in your view?
You would be adding more nutrients back to the soil through. So one of the things that we look at when we burn is we want black ash. We've seen in all the photos where I said there was a white-on fire. When we burn on soil moisture, we have black ash, no white ash. That black ash has got organic matter into it. The way it's been described to me by the old fellows is that's like fertilizer going back into the soil. And that's what the benefit would be. Is if you burnt in with a good soil moisture and a paddock that he's not going to use for a little while, so following the principle that Gil's talking about, where he's not putting stock on before the grass is ready to be used, he's got some fertilizer going back into it, some nutrients going back into the soil.
So one of the things about regenerative stuff is they say they say a grazier is a soil manager, not a grass grower. You look after your soil and most other stuff by doing what you just said and keeping this hydration. And we talked about, somebody back there talked about fungi and all the bacteria that's necessary to have a good soil.
You look after your soil, it'll look after you.
But it sounds like, you know, what Alistair's talking about is like taking us back to the before the no-till sort of movement that you used to burn your crop at the end of the season, didn't you? And that fertilised and cleansed it.
Yeah, very much so. That was the old
Yeah.
conventional agriculture. You always burnt your stubble, and all the organic matter went up in the air. And I think that it's gone the other way now, with the zero till people know you've got to keep that stubble there because that preserves your moisture, and it stops wind erosion. And there's been a whole big change.
So, hang on. No, don't need that. I don't need that. There's two ways to get that carbon into the soil, which is from your grass you previously grew. You chop up your country into little paddocks and shift your cattle very regularly. In my case, cattle anyway, whatever stock you got. But don't leave in there too long, because that is a problem as well. So you're better off putting them in there for less time. Okay. So in the process, you stomp that grass onto the ground and use it for a ground cover and turn it into a ground cover. That then goes into carbon that goes into the soil. That carbon in the soil allows infiltration of rainwater. Once it gets in there, each particle of carbon can hold, I know what the figure, but 5, 6, 10 times more water than a particle of soil can. So you need that carbon in the soil. The other way to do it, if you don't have the stock numbers to do this trampling, and that takes a bit of, I myself could do with another 200 head of cattle at home. I've got 800, I could do it 200 more easy. But I'm not going because it might be dry next year, I might need that. So the other way to do it is to burn small areas. If you can't smash it with feet, you then use fire. And if you don't use either, that grass you've been growing oxidizes and becomes pretty bloody useless, really. It can get that bad that even if you did grain, it almost won't grow new growth. It really won't. That's extreme, yes, but that can happen, like snow. So in some areas you need to burn it. That rejuvenates, the fertilizers, and then rejuvenates the whole atmosphere, retards regrowth if you've got a problem there. Most of us do. So you either got to smash it down with feed or you burn it, one or the other. And that usually only takes about 3 years, and that's what happens. So after a big year of rain, you need one or the other. If I may say so, since middle of November to now, on a 2-inch rainfall, we've had 25 inches of rain. And not one single gallon of that, litre of that has run off. Not one. We have 3 or 4 or 5 major gullies and creeks through home. They haven't run at all. They haven't run. We've got 7 dams, they're all dry and blue. So we have run an enormous amount of grass without any more extra numbers of cattle. So we now have to burn or smash it with people. I haven't got enough peat, so I've got to try and burn something.
So easy to run a property, isn't it? Any more pressing questions? Okay, last one.
This is more philosophical. One place on our first speaker where we see through history 4 or 5, 6, 10 very, very major changes of vegetation. Probably much, much greater than we'll ever see with climate change in our lifetime. But we're very scared of climate change. Maybe we should be much more scared of history. And we also comment on how we have some sort of sociological, emotional attachment to some sort of vegetation state. And if I think back, well, maybe pre-Aboriginal is one I like. Spinifex winds everywhere. Not many trees. Then we have pre-European. We have a landscape probably much more open, originally burnt. And now we have today's. And people value these differently. And it's probably by the media, and I'm wondering how should we value our landscapes? And because they are ephemeral things that sometimes go.
You only have one landscape, don't make any more. Don't make it, no, don't keep making it.
Actually, thank you for that, those comments, because I think that's the problem we face, is we don't have what I call a genuinely well agreed vision of what it should look like. We all have different values. I think people say our landscape is cultural, that is defined by our beliefs and what we'd like to have. And unfortunately, we still have different sort of views of what it should be. Thank you very much for speakers. The enlightening, have we solved the problem or are we only just started the conversation?
Just before you leave, I'd like to invite Nelson to make a few final remarks. Thank you.
Look, what I'd like to do is simply thank everybody who's come. Thank our people who put so much into it. I'm impressed with Lee, who said he's not interested in policy. Turns out he's a really good policy one. Turns out Charles is accidentally on the panel and just the kind of person we needed there. But particularly thank Arachne and the Royal Geographic Society of Queensland for a great place to be at. All the work they put into getting this organised. So thank you all again, and good hand for our.
Thank you.
And final word from me, President John, who's been here all the afternoon monitoring things on his computer.
Working away at the same time. Final thanks as well to our wonderful panel speakers, as well to the Royal Society team. It's been fantastic to collaborate on this forum, and look forward to potential future collaborations in the future. As always, do keep an eye on the RGSQ website. We've got plenty of other events on if this has interested you and you'd like to learn more. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and I'm sure we'll see you around at another event very soon.
Thank you.